You made the point, Lawrence, that during the privatisation process, part of the government's role was to maintain the viability of the rural area. Rural decline has been an issue in Australia for decades. I'm just wondering if you could expand upon what that role of government is in your country.
Yes, yes I can. Is this thing on? Yes. So, well, obviously the Netherlands is very different from Australia. We are a mini, tiny country compared to yours. So, maintaining the viability of the countryside in that sense is way easier because you can develop new functions much easier because the distances are much shorter. So, for example, government saw that a particular segment of dairy farmers couldn't cope in, modernization, mechanization, cranking up productivity levels. So they reoriented them also with, tailored projects, also developing advisory and research capacity in areas to what we call care farms, where mental health care is combined with a farming environment. So their productivity is a minor concern, and they have a new business model to still keep it viable. So then you still keep farms in the countryside, but with a new function. And there you see that government thought along, how can we keep this viable? And this also requires maybe a creative process. How can we create new functions for that agricultural production capacity, or maybe completely convert it to something else, but making use of that, the people there. So that requires investment in setting a new vision, creating the knowledge for it, developing viable models, and also helping in making people to change. And there I think a public investment is necessary because there's not yet a market for it. But obviously in Australia this is a tough question, and a tough issue because your country is very different.
Stay in the front, thank you. Thanks.
Mark, my question was to you. You had 3 distinct researchers, development, extension. Are they completely different skills and people that you target for each one, or is it like a progression? Extension people desire to be researchers one day?
Yeah, thanks for that question. We're going through a process at the moment that we're calling the program approach that hits on exactly that point, that are we behaving in too much of a siloed way? So if you look at any individual, they may start an extension and go into development roles with so 5 years in the field and then start specialising in, say, mastitis management and so on. And vice versa, they'll move into extension and more senior roles. But what we are doing is now saying that drive this entire thing off a strategic target and assemble your teams across all capabilities, and include within that the education sector when required as well, which is sitting outside of DRNZ.
Are they the same people skills you look for in each area? Or
Can you repeat that, Mark?
So the question was, are the same people skills sitting across research, development and extension? No, they're not. Clearly there's a greater responsibility to sort of appreciate the complexity of the full farm system, and by that I mean not just the cows and grass dynamic, I'm meaning the people and the financial dimensions to on-farm change as well.
Thanks, Mark. In the middle, thank you.
Thank you very much. Tim Lester from the Council of Rural R&D Corporations. Mark, you mentioned the really important relationship between farmers and their advisors, ultimately. What I'm wondering is what is the place or position or advice for research investors, as my group are, or the research providers within that, and is it simply about packaging up information for the advisors?
I guess with so we're research investors as well on the levy side of it. The importance, I guess, of working with that full sort of institutional arrangement that we put up there was to say that there's no better person than the farmer to explain the ground up position. As Lauren said, there's a supply chain dimension to this as well, which is viewed partially from the farm. But in both cases, there's a third dimension, which is, in our case, the New Zealand public that's kicking and screaming about the environmental footprint and saying, we get the profitability requirement. We just think you guys are freeloading off our water quality and we're not going to take it anymore. So those three voices have got to be assembled in that research priority setting process when we go through the investment. And so from a farm side of it, you might be able to frame farm profitability over a 3 to 5 year window. But when you're talking regional development or economic development, getting that 10-year plus time frame is a more challenging thing, I think, for the RDC to approach investment beyond just the farmer's perception.
Okay, if there are no more questions, I'm sorry to keep moving it along. There is one, is there? Okay, fantastic.
Mark, Angus Hobson, I'm farmer in southern New South Wales and chair the Southern Australia Meat Research Council, big fan of New Zealand. I'm just wondering, obviously you don't have a taxpayer levy funding matching system in New Zealand, but have you got a feel for the approximate percentage of government investment in RD&E in New Zealand? It's obviously a very different model to what we're privileged to have in Australia, and I'm just keen to know what that sort of number is.
So we'll just keep it within this room, shall we? But there is actually one that's a little bit like that. So there's a thing called the Primary Growth Partnership, which is it used to be a dollar for dollar match. So it's just been shifted so that it's 60% industry, 40% government. But that's applied for on a case-by-case basis, not a given in terms of the RDC system, but gets pretty close to what you're talking about. So for the dairy situation, basically it works out at about 2/3, 1/3 if you're looking at research development extension funding, that's levy versus government support, or contested government funding, I suppose you could put it. If you bring the education system into that, that would be bringing it closer to about 50-50, because the government funding for education is more like a bit over a 3-to-1 government to industry.
And the total amount, Mark, have you got
Total amount is about 90 million for dairy annually, yeah.
Right.